Welcome, everyone, to the Corporate Ethics Bowl for APPE. Excited to have this session today. Sorry that we had some AV issues, but hopefully everyone can hear and we can get started here. I want to thank Tyler Waltz for helping work with us to get this program up and running. I think most of you are at the plenary session, and wow, what a presentation from Dr. Tallbear, and hopefully now we can continue before the reception starts and get into the Corporate Ethics Bowl. We are, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So this session is built on a pilot last year, actually, in a breakout session at the APPE conference, and it was the Corporate Ethics Bowl. It was a concept as a best practice sharing forum focused on typical situations an ethics or a compliance officer could address in a typical day. The purpose of the APPE Corporate Ethics Bowl is linked to APPE's goal to develop programming specifically tailored for the role of an ethics or compliance officer, and to provide an interactive engagement for these professionals along with academic and student session. And let me say the inspiration for developing a corporate ethics bowl as part of APPE's programming is really built from the APPE Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl that started 26 years ago. And our hope is, having seen the success of that program and the engagement of students at the college and university level around ethical dilemmas and how they would address those or think through those problems, then watching its high school program, which is not through APPE, but the National High School Ethics Bowl program, we thought corporations should also participate, so we can learn, we can set up a best practice sharing forum, and we can also demonstrate to students that this matters, what they're doing and studying at the college and high school level through what we're doing with companies. The session will have 10 real-life cases in which all participants can vote on one of several responses, followed by dialogue. Back up, my name is Ed Carr, and I'm a compliance officer with Siemens. I've been with the company for 12 years. Prior to that, I was an ethics officer with the Boeing company. And we're wanting to do is, what I've done is develop some cases that I would see or have seen in a typical day in my experience, and then engage everyone to think through how you might respond to or what your position might be. I can provide my feedback with each case as we get into it. On how we would address it within my company. But really the goal is for me to talk less and for the group to kind of think through together. There are right or wrong answers. Some of the responses are probably not very good at all, and you'll see, but hopefully there's to select from something that you would find reasonable. First, I want to thank the participants last year that really kicked us off with the breakout session, and it was a different design we used last year. We used 5 cases, and we had individuals representing different companies filled down as compliance specialists, and also intercollegiate ethics bowl competitor for many years, and now he's part of the leadership team for the Northwest APPE Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl. John Griffin is a compliance program manager with Intel Corporation. Matt Solomon with Director of Ethics, Culture and Policy Governance at AT&T. Scott Sullivan is the Chief Integrity and Compliance Officer at Newmont, and Nicole White is the Americas Compliance Officer for Siemens Digital Industries Software. So from what we learned in the session last year, we talked about how do we make this more interactive so that we can bring in a larger group of ethics and compliance professionals into the conversation and not just have the discussion and dialogue between a few people. This is information, and you were asking earlier how you get in from your computer. If you're in Zoom, the number at the end, 7458-37005, should bring you in. And the reason we're asking everybody to join through Zoom is because, again, it's interactive. When we get into the cases, you can respond with your answer to each case. While you're, and it looks like still then getting your computer set up, I want to share a little bit from my company, Siemens, what we're doing around the area of ethics. It's been very exciting this last year as we've launched into a new ethics initiative. Tyler, if we can jump to the next slide. Siemens has implemented last year what's called the degree framework. And this was something that we announced as a company at the Capital Day Market. And it's really a sustainability framework for the company. And in that sustainability framework, one of the key pillars is ethics. So this is now going to be an area where we're focusing on fostering a culture of trust, adhering to ethical standards, and handling data with care. Data privacy is a key area. Tyler, if we go to the next slide. The way we're implementing this, and the compliance organization at Siemens is responsible to do this. So the goal that we have is to empower employees to consciously do the right thing in line with our Siemens values and with our business conduct guidelines to support a more structured decision-making process, and to also develop ethics into our processes, our tools, and our controls, and then to foster a dialogue on ethics and supporting clear messaging, incorporating ethics into existing processes. It's not that it's not having an ethics program. We've just traditionally been focused very heavily on being a compliance organization with the compliance system. Our business conduct guidelines have always spoke to the company values and integrity, but the managing board at Siemens has realized that we need to speak more about ethics. So the ethics organization or the compliance organization will be involved with implementing this. So I just wanted to share that reference and that perspective as one company and the focus going forward more on ethics. So now we're going to get into the cases. First, we have a demographics question that we want to start with to warm up. So Tyler, if we can go to the first question. So we'd like to find out, just to calibrate with those of you that are attending today, how many of you are ethics and compliance professionals working in a business setting? How many of you are educators working in academia? How many are students? Or D would be another area. We don't expect a large number of ethics and compliance professionals because we've not yet promoted this to the larger group. We've invited a few ethics and compliance professionals from one of the network called the Northwest Ethics Network through Seattle University. And so we may have a few people here on the Zoom call with us. All right, so it looks like we're predominantly from educators and working in academia. 82%, 9% students. That's wonderful to have students joining us. No ethics and compliance professionals, but that will come once we cut our teeth in terms of setting up the platform here. Anyone like to share what area you're from, if not one of these areas? We'll leave it at that. Then we'll go ahead and jump in now to the first case and we'll get caught up here. Tyler, thank you. You're going to be our timekeeper. We'll try to spend about 7-8 minutes on each case and see how we do. So first case, and I'll go ahead and read it in case anyone's having trouble seeing it on the slides. So case one, is child labor ever okay? The supplier refuses to sign a customer's required code of conduct without an edited child labor provision or restriction included to reflect that their position being that child labor is acceptable and legal in some countries. So what should the customer or you do in the case where a supplier would refuse to sign your code of conduct, your company's code of conduct? So 4 answers to choose from: work with the supplier to educate them on the importance of protecting children and convincing the supplier to sign your code of conduct, engage the legal department to determine the merit of the supplier's position, block procurement and any further relationships with the supplier, or another topic that you might consider. So Tyler, if we can go ahead and bring up the voting box. So it's looking like we've got a split. About half of the people would say work with the supplier to edit. 27% engage the legal department to get guidance, and 27%. So let me just open it up to other. Any thoughts or ideas of what would be another step or solution you'd have to address this? Yes, sir.
I'm remembered of a famous case of Levi Strauss in Pakistan in the 1990s. And in order to avoid child labor, they actually paid the wages to the parents so that the children could go to school and got also the guarantee to get a job when they turn 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's very generous, and it was discussed in the Harvard Business Review many times. And I think, I mean, Levi Strauss wanted to be a pioneer in ethics, and I think they did a good job.
That's outstanding. So in that instance, this is something that's not done to take advantage of children, but to support them. Okay. Interest, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, the Bayer crop science case, Bayer's, been in India for 100 years, bought something called crop science that has farmers and they use children to harvest the linseeds. And of course, according to Bayer's principles, child labor is never condoned anywhere in the world. And so their employees all said, you got to sell this company. So instead, they went in and paid the farmers premiums not to use the children and then help educate the children so they go back to school. That's too short, but it's a great case. It's more complicated.
That is a great case, and that's an example.
They didn't bring in Bayer's educators. They were only with Indian.
With locally in the country. But it was a company like that that would need to take a position like that. The large multinational companies can do that. So, thank you. That's a great perspective. An example. Other thoughts? I will share again saying that these are real examples. Tomorrow I will have a meeting with our head of procurement at my company and also the business who's encouraging working with the supplier because they have a really cool gadget that we need for our technology. And our answer is going to be, unless there's some discussion, legal will also be present, and that's part of the goal is to have everyone aligned. But unless they can give a solid answer, we're not going to adapt or amend our contract and provisions around child labor to accommodate one supplier. And we feel strongly that's a position we need to take. Yes, sir.
I have a question. In a few days, the European Union is going to vote on a draft on human rights, respect for human rights for companies in global supply chains. And it is the EU, Germany, France, the Netherlands already have this kind of laws, and it would be maybe interesting to know what they are requiring. I'm from Switzerland. Switzerland tried to introduce that and failed, but now they have the picture.
But that's the goal, is that this is being discussed, and then we can all around the world learn from this. Great. Any thoughts on those of you on the Zoom call with us? Thank you. Okay, forgery. During a key customer interaction, the customer identifies a contract amendment you've provided that appears to be signed by a customer officer that's no longer with that company. The customer points this out. The customer is not concerned. The amendment's a very minor issue, and they go ahead and sign a new amendment so that it's official. During an internal investigation, an employee admits to signing the amendment for convenience, stating the customer was aware that of the needed amendment, and having waited to route that for the signature would have taken time and delayed delivery for the customer. So what should be consequences for an employee that would take an action like that to expedite an amendment to the contract without taking the proper step to have the customer sign that? So the responses are none, no personal incentive or bad intention was apparent on the part of the employee involved with the decision, and the issue was addressed satisfactorily with the customer, therefore no consequences needed. 2, coaching or verbal warning. While it is wrong to forge a signature, in this case, the employee was acting termination. The employee not only violated company policy, also violated the law and subjected the company to potential severe legal consequences. forging a document. 4 or D, other multiple to be considered when determining an appropriate disciplinary action. Okay, we go to the poll. Thank you. So we've got 10 responses, fairly evenly distributed. 30% saying coaching, verbal warning, 30% saying separation, 30% none, multiple factors should be considered. So any thoughts on this? Let's start on the Zoom call. Anyone on the Zoom call that would like to join in the discussion? Okay, anyone here in the room? Yes.
Or his or her manager could be fired as well. So because, I mean, after all, sort of following orders, so I think they both should go. We can't put up with this, because it'll happen again, guaranteed.
It's a cultural issue. If this would be something that an employee could consider that they should do. Yes, sir. Oh. Other thoughts?
Well, again, I think that it's, you know, the no personal incentive, I think, is key. It's also, are we, you know, would, you know, a severe response adversely affect initiative in company and creative problem solving? I mean, in some ways it was a creative solution to the problem. Now, it may have not been the right creative solution to the problem, but if you were to tamp down on that, the ripple effect of that could discourage you. So I lean more towards 2, right? That there's documentation that we kind of, as a corporation, assert that this isn't right, but it's understood. Yeah.
So coaching and trying to help develop an understanding, training for a large group of employees, which is typically what we'll do after a case like that within a particular region or country where something like this occurs, just to ensure that everyone understands the rules, not that everyone was involved in forging a signature. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would go for B in the sense that I think what you would say to the employee is, I understand you were seeing customer, taking care of our customers, which is a corporate value that we really encourage, and you know, we appreciate that part of it. But there are other things that overcome that. So if you were going to do that, was there time, for example, to go further up the corporation and say, you know, can we get some confirmation this is okay to do, or in order to get the material to the customer, was it necessary to, you know, was that the only way it could be done? I mean, you want to be sure that the employee has considered this really does go against our another corporate value, and the question of balancing those values, you know, is something that that you want them to understand is important, but you will say, okay, we'll write it out, and we don't want it to be part of of our general corporate practice and necessary for training without a memo. We've had it came up, and you understand why the employee went that way. But that's not the way we like to work for the culture to balance those two values. But you know, that way you get it. You buy yourself an educational moment. You know, you don't sit on the try to stifle the employees so they feel like us. You know, if I do anything outside of our usual practices, that I'm going to always be wrong and they're going to fire me for that, or really difficult. It seems to me that in light of the concerns that we've always taught, one of our leaders, that we need to use our imagination to try to widen the scope of what we could do. I mean, think of the good that we're going to do get out of this in terms of the education of our culture.
It's a good response. This is that we shouldn't create a culture where people fear coming forward or learning. And again, with these responses, different organizations have different risk tolerance, and they'll accept different approaches. In the company I'm with Siemens, we would lean towards termination. In the case of, this is a simple amendment to a contract, but if somebody's willing to do that on an amendment, are they willing to do more? The caveat to that, though, is you can't always terminate an employee just because they violated a law or a policy. You've got to go through the kind of a legal structure to determine in that country what is appropriate, what's allowed. So in Europe, typically you're going to have the opportunity to warn someone. In other countries, you can take an action when it's employment at will to terminate. It's a difficult decision. I've been involved with termination of employees for something like this, and it's very hard to kind of work through. You're having an impact on the employee and the family, but our thought is that in terms of the culture, we need to ensure that that's just not something that would be acceptable behavior to actually forge a signature. But there are many instances of other things that wouldn't be as egregious as a forgery that you would give a warning or some type of a disciplinary action short of separation from the company. But again, every organization could treat this differently, and that's just an approach we've used. These are all good responses. Tyler, a question. Are you on the Zoom? Is everyone able to hear the conversation? One slide. Thank you, sir. Okay, solicitation for a good cause. An employee would like to support her son's extracurricular activities, including selling chocolate bars to help a nonprofit organization generate income. The employee brings several cases of chocolate bars to work for sale to office colleagues. The chocolate bar program is nationally recognized. The bars are reasonably priced. Children selling the most chocolate bars are recognized and rewarded for their accomplishments. Is it appropriate for the employee to sell their child's chocolate bars at the office? Choice is yes. What a great cause, an opportunity to make it convenient for office colleagues to buy these popular chocolate bars. No, this would be a solicitation in the workplace. And there we go. And could make other employees feel uncomfortable or pressured to buy the chocolate bars from their coworker. Yes, while it's a solicitation, the employee can utilize a passive solicitation technique, such as placing the chocolate bars in a common break area with a sign stating the price and a trust jar to get payment for. Is no, the employee could though pay for the chocolate bars and give them out to colleagues as a gift. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Every organization could treat this type of a topic differently.
I know how I felt last week when I had a coworker send me an email.
An email where they
an email about oh yeah, it's like oh.
So this is where it's something that you would prefer not to be in a position to say no from a coworker. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Some days at the grocery store, I'll walk out the other door just because I've eaten too many of the cookies. No, and you want to support. So it looks like answer-wise, let's see, 33% would be solicitation in the workplace, so no. 30% yes, using a passive solicitation approach. 18% no, but you can buy. And again, this is absolutely acceptable, where you would pay yourself and bring the chocolate bars and give them to people. Other thoughts? Gretchen, you want to pick two answers.
Yeah, no, but B and D both are okay. B and D are okay, right? But the answer should be no, in my opinion. If you want to buy chocolate and give it to your friends who work, hey, a present, how lucky. And but I'm a labor and employment lawyer from way back, and in the United States, this notion of allowing solicitation in the workplace for some things but not others is hugely problematic. Mm-hmm. Most employers are not eager to allow union organizers who are employees to circulate
union petitions in the workplace, and they want to stop that. Oh no, you can't do that. Well, if you allow them to sell Girl Scout cookies or chocolate bars or wrapping paper or whatever else it is that's going on, you have no leg to stand on, and you have to let these union petitions get circulated. Back to the end of the question, right? So that's a U.S. perspective. It may be different elsewhere, but in the United States, most employers who think about this stuff take a hard line on this, and the answer is just no.
No. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir. Sorry, we just have one mic to share tonight. It's great if you.
Yeah, I was kind of torn between B and D, and my first thought was, well, who gets to determine what a good cause is? Because another employee comes in and selling, pentagrams for the Satanic Temple, and that maybe will say that's not a good cause, but you let that person raise the talk about it for school. Why are you including it? So who gets who's playing favorites?
It is, and it creates a system of, it could be inequality and people feeling that they're not, other people have a privilege that they would like too. That's an interesting example though.
Well,
yeah. Yes, sir.
To add, to this case, I'd be curious about like where the person was in the hierarchy. So at
This
my
is another
institution,
point.
we had, somebody kind of at a VP level. No pressure, they always say, but how do you not feel pressure to?
That's a key point, is that in addition to Rich, to what you were saying, is that hierarchy can create pressure for people. It's not just saying no and feeling badly. It's, I need to do this, or next performance review, next promotion, I'm going to be remembered for having not bought the cookies or
Only
the
bought
chocolate
3,
bars. Yeah.
Tell me about.
Could have bought 20.
I have to share a story of a fight coming by from a colleague, a child, selling chicken barbecue. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm a vegetarian, I don't eat chicken. He said, no, not chickens, chicken. Should I explain to him that chicken comes from chicken? Or not? That's a technical delivery for you.
That's great. Any other thoughts? We'll move on. I will say, and again, this is an example where, in the typical day of an ethics or compliance officer, people trust the organization. They'll come to the ethics or compliance officer for guidance. Not all of them are to that serious of matters, but you have to be prepared on any day for the type of topics. Now, I come to APPE, and it's just, I'm thrilled to have the exposure each year in terms of ethical theories and all the discussions, deep discussions that take place. And some of these cases you'll see are tied to ethical theories, but anything can come across to your desk on any day. It's incredible. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to case 4. Oh, yes. Oh, from my perspective, yes, we wouldn't allow, we would allow the passive solicitation. Yes, put it in a lunchroom where the bars are there. It's a trust system. We do accept that. It shouldn't say this is who they're from. It's just that these are chocolate bars, and you collect the money. But it shouldn't. We wouldn't encourage it, but we don't stop that from happening. But if an employee is actually asking other employees, we would stop it there.
Yeah, so you guys would allow a union petition to be on the table.
Yes. Yeah.
The petition is not anonymous. When you're putting few dollars, it's anonymous. Nobody knows who buys what and how much.
Right, but if you allow solicitation broadly, right, you're not making a decision. I don't think whether it is anonymous or not. About the part is anonymous, but if you allow the solicitation to that process, it means you would also have to allow someone to put it down.
In petition, there is a pressure. I mean, he signed, you signed, and I signed, why wouldn't you sign? I mean, like, you're not going to check who bought a couple of them, right?
Yeah, but I would not want to take that one from the LLC. So
Okay, conflict with the timeshare. So a consultant offers a customer executive the use of his timeshare. The consultant has developed a personal relationship in addition to the professional relationship with the customer executive over years. The consultant can't use the timeshare this year due to other obligations and the benefit's going to expire. Can the executive accept the offer to use the timeshare? Options. Yes, the customer executive is not directly involved with pending decisions related to the consultant's engagement with the company. No, it would be a conflict of interest for the customer executive to accept a gift from a third-party consultant. C, it is up to the customer executive to use good judgment, and if accepting the offer, should pay the full value to the consultant. And D is no, even if the actual conflict of interest can be properly mitigated, the perceived conflict of interest in optics, if the employee were aware of the gift, preclude the customer executive from accepting. 71%, the perceived conflict of interest would override. 20% saying it would not be a conflict of interest. To accept the gift from a third party.
so C and D really both say no, it's a conflict of interest.
Yes. But really, the question is it a conflict? Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? Any thoughts? In the interest of time, we'll move on. What I'll say is that this would be something we would discourage not only for an executive, but for any employee in the company. Where, as one employer, again, this would be specific to the organization, small organizations, private companies. It's something that's more tolerable, but we as a publicly listed company, we would just not want to have any perceived conflict of interest with any employee. We pay employees very well in the company, and we would expect them not to accept a gift from a third party they're working with. However, back to the example of forgery, a person that did this would not be terminated, likely, unless there were extenuating circumstances. It would be something of a warning and some type of a disciplinary action not to do that again.
Look at the past experience or past action of the individual. So they had done something else, either like this or something else that violated your statute. Would you escalate or still count?
We do. So the way Siemens, the way an investigation is done is the results are completed. It's either substantiated or not substantiated. And then if there's if it's substantiated that an employee violated policy, then it would be the recommendation to the business to take appropriate action. And that would be done through what we call an LDC, which is a local disciplinary council. So it includes the leader of that particular business, the CEO is what we typically would say, the CFO of the business, the head of HR, the head of legal, and the compliance officer would together go through a discussion. The compliance organization would lead that discussion, but not vote. If they felt there was anything inappropriate, they would raise their hand. Also, the head of legal would do that. So that's the role they play. Thank you, Tyler. So ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Hopefully this is a topic people are either familiar with or becoming familiar with, but this is an approach that's used by socially conscious investors to ensure who they're going to invest with. So most companies will have an ESG process. So the company's ESG and export control process flags a customer recently listed by the US government for human rights violations. A large order representing a full realignment of a customer's IT strategy to source with the company is pending. Big money for the company. As a listed entity, the order could only be fulfilled with an approved export license from the US government. Should the company apply for an export license? Answers: the company should apply for the export license so that they can fulfill the order. The company should forego the application for an export license and cease business with the customer, or other. Government can be.
I know colleagues that we're at a country, international. They don't have to go like a political philosophy. They can label a company as being not compliant on ESG now.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden we're saying, if Lawrence Colbert was here today, he'd say, boy, we're really in the law and order all of a sudden. I'm not sure why, in this case, you would not want to have some serious conversation about why they were listed. I mean, right now, the Canadian government could be called for violating human rights. Now, if you happen to be on one segment, you think that they did just a wonderful thing to clear a protest that they didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
We've had other protests on the other side of the spectrum where they went down. That's why I'm a little, when the government that you're dealing with here, and there is no, it's a slightly risky. That's been.
So you're taking this into another area where it's important, especially as larger companies. Typically within our export community, we'll hire individuals with experience that have worked in regulatory agencies in the world. Not that they're going to curry favor from the regulatory agencies, but they have a network and they can ask questions. But at the surface, when an order comes in and you have a particular sanction, you've got to take that very seriously. You may have that debate following, but you've got to take a decision. And you have an opportunity to apply for an export license or choose not to do the business. So 80% are saying that the company should forego. Any other thoughts in terms of why that position? Yes.
You don't have to go very far to get human rights violations.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to think seriously about that whole issue of human rights. I'm not in favor, obviously, of violating human rights, but we've been violating human rights of people of color for how many centuries,
Mm-hmm.
and women, so and other minorities. So I think we have to be. I think I'd vote too, but I would be really cautious about that. Remind ourselves that we're not perfect either.
Mm-hmm.
If it's America, I mean, if it's a German company, ditto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry.
Any company. Mm-hmm.
The whole world is not very much human rights.
Well said. I think that's one of the challenges companies have in terms of what is the right answer. We're just going through the. Let me stop and see if there's other comments or thoughts. But, so as we're implementing more focus on ethics, ethical decision making at Siemens, we're thinking about this a lot harder. Now, if the sanction involves military or dual use, we're going to apply for the license. Let the government decide. Until you've seen enough instances where the government would say no, like a company like Huawei. We know the government's position, those sanctions are in place to harm the company, we're not going to do business. Our challenge is that if we take an easy way to say, well, it's not we can punt and we can ask the government always, it doesn't demonstrate to the government that you as a company are a good actor. They have a purpose. They want to ensure that you're taking actions and taking what their sanctions are seriously. Human rights, our position is we're still evolving, but would be that the company should address its issues before we would do business. And that's not to say that you wouldn't necessarily work with the government and try to understand why that human rights violation exists. But our first position would be, rather than rely on the government, take a position, take a stand as a company. We recently did this with a company that makes products that everybody loves. They're drones. You can go to Costco and buy them, but we're not going to sell our technology until they address their human rights violations. But it's a tough call for a business. A lot of revenue sits on the table in some of these decisions.
Let's say that, for example, Russia is asking for Siemens to buy equipment, life-saving equipment. Would Siemens sell to Russia with such equipment?
I spent most today instead of in an ethics directors center meeting or ethics center directors meeting on calls as we go through this. And the example is mobility. We make trains. If we're making trains and in Russia there's a municipality that needs trains, what would our decision be there? If we know that they're for civil use and we have an assurance there, we would still want to do business. If we know they might be used for the purposes of transporting military items, then we'd have a different thought or consideration.
From the moment that you sell the trains, you don't know what they're going to do.
But the customer needs to declare what they're going to use for. Now, whether you trust or not, that gets into another topic. Sorry?
But you don't believe that the declaration is Putin, right? Making the declaration is enough.
Well, that's at a very senior level. If we're at the customer level, we're looking at not just dependent on them declaring what their end use is for a product, but also looking at the history of working with that company and what do they do. A helicopter manufacturer in Russia makes both civil and military aircraft, so that's something you have to look at closely. Medical devices, you could probably get there a lot quicker in terms of this is helping people and it's an area we would want to support for humanity. But again, no easy decisions there. Lots of conversations as we navigate through this. It's the senior management in consultation. And if you work in the right environment with the right culture in a company, the senior management engages directly the compliance officer and the general counsel. But that can vary from organization to organization. But ultimately, the call is the business. And the way that would happen is compliance may take a very strong position. The business could choose to accept the risk involved or associated with that and take the decision. Fortunately, I don't work in a company where I have to live with those decisions. Yeah. Okay.
Sayed, could you repeat her question? We couldn't hear it quite on Zoom. Thank you.
Oh, do you have, if you go ahead.
Sorry, I was just asking at Siemens specifically. I know it varies by company, but I was curious where the buck kind of stops with the decision, or, you know, can the compliance office basically be overruled by the senior management? It sounds like it can happen.
It can happen. Yes, ultimately. Thanks. Traditions. Country level business team requests an exception to a global gift and hospitality policy on the prohibition of such things as red envelope gifts or entertainment venues. The justification provided with the request include documentation that this is a widely accepted practice in the country and it meets with the cultural norms. What should the company position be? The company can approve the requested exception as it is within the country acceptable, or the company should not approve the requested exception to its global gift and hospitality policy or other.
Well, I remember, you know, that famous book by Motorola, Uncompromising with Integrity. They have a Japan policy just for this problem, which is relevant for the country, for Japan, but not for other countries.
So they adopted or took the position that an exception would be acceptable in country.
So at Baxter, when I worked there, we had policies by country, not just Japan, but Japan, China, Indonesia, Belgium. We reviewed all the laws. Oh, at Baxter, I worked for Baxter, right? Because these issues of gifts and hospitality is vary wildly by country and by industry. So in the medical products industry, which is what Baxter was in, the ministries of health have very different rules, country by country, in terms of gifts and entertainment. In Germany, it's fondly referred to as the McDonald's rule, because you could never take anybody out for anything more than it would cost you to buy a hamburger and a Coke at McDonald's, right? That's it, that's the entertainment. In France, you can do different kinds of entertainment at a large corporate meeting. However, every venue, every restaurant, every plan that you make has to be submitted to the Ministry of Health, and they have to approve before you can actually have the event. They never actually get you your approval back in time, and so this creates all kinds of planning problems. But every country does something a little bit different in industry. So we had a big book of gifts and entertainment standards that were broken down by topic, by country, by type of business.
It's very complicated.
George, what I remember in the Uncompromising Integrity book was the fact that they developed a policy in Japan where they would give a gift to a charity in the name of the person, and the person could select that charity, but they were not going to allow the employees to give any gift directly to another company's employee. And so that way they would tell their employees, we're maintaining a respect for the integrity of this company, of this country's culture, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't violate our policies. And I'm sure that was the situation.
Interesting. Thank you. Good thoughts? Okay. Well, I think very similar at Siemens in terms of country by country, we would take there's just an opportunity to have exceptions on, but we are having and have had just some difficult discussions around certain traditions that we would as a company say that that's not appropriate. A hostess bar, for instance, is not somewhere where we would want, even if it's traditional in a country, where we would want to be involved with our employees taking customers too. So our position would be we fully recognize and appreciate customs within the country, but as a global business, we do have certain lines that are going to be standard globally. And then within other areas, we can make exceptions case by case. Thank you, Tyler. Recognition when it's a government representative. A government representative that's retained by a government agency, but as a contractor has been instrumental to the success of your business. Representative's retirements being planned, and your company would like to recognize her with a framed picture of an occasion that you know will be meaningful for her. Value of the picture and frame, $700. Can the company give this recognition? It's acceptable to recognize the government representative, A. B, it's not acceptable to recognize the government representative with this gift. C, it depends. And this is where it helps to, as a compliance or ethics officer, to have a good relationship with your legal department. 60% depends, 33% not acceptable. Why don't we start there? If anyone wants to say any strong feeling about it not being acceptable or reason why.
To be something like under 10 of them, $25. You can do a picture for $25. Go to Walmart and get a frame. This is just too much money.
Mm-hmm.
If I were the receiver, I would sell them.
Or take a picture outside the frame. Good point. Okay.
Well, isn't there, like, some companies do have a fairly low threshold gift amount because it's an expression of gratitude. It's not, a $700 gift that they can have material value, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the amount matters.
Mm-hmm. It does. What's reasonable, what's acceptable. It is an important factor. Any other thoughts? So this is an area where there are some regulatory requirements. For instance, if you're a federal employee, there's a limit to a gift value, $50 per year, $20 per occasion. But as a contractor, it gets a little more vague in terms of what's acceptable. And then the value of the gift too is something that you'd want to take a look at. It could be offered in a less expensive frame. It could be offered without a frame, and then some small company related gift. You can make a case to do this, and there are cases where companies would give a gift of this value if it's legal. Whether that's a government employee or a customer or a business they've worked with, $700 for multinational companies, not necessarily considered a high value, although individually, I think we can consider it to be a high value. Some companies will take customers as a gift to a NASCAR race, and that gets in, or a sports event that gets into quite expensive. It's legal in some cases, but it's something to watch for. And you don't want to set up a standard as a company or a reputation that you gift customers or third parties that you work with. Okay, case 8. We've got about 20 minutes left. Everybody doing okay? Thank you, Tyler. Okay, nepotism and the CEO. Division CEO is asked by another division CEO to hire their child who just graduated from MIT, has a strong affinity and skill set to join the company. The division CEO asks for ethics and compliance officer if she can hire the candidate. A, the EC officer can confidently respond that hiring the candidate is acceptable because of their strong credentials. The EC officer needs to explain this would be a potential conflict of interest. Therefore, the division CEO should not hire the candidate. C, it depends. Needs to explain it would be a potential conflict of interest, or it depends. Why don't we start with where it would be a potential conflict of interest and they shouldn't hire. Thoughts there?
But if this is in the U.S., this would be conflict of interest. You can't do it. But if you're in, say India, if you don't hire my cousin, you're insulting me. And so it's really very difficult. That's what happened in the Union Carbide. They had to hire cousins and uncles and aunts, and they were completely incompetent. But so it's really very touchy in some countries if you don't hire relatives. So that's why I had to put it in. And I don't know how you work around that, but you need to work around that. But it is very touchy.
Go country by country. Yes, yeah, very good point. It's the rules, the laws are different, and what's culturally acceptable is different. Other thoughts? Anyone that took the position that no. This is very common, as you've said, and in some countries more common. I think you go to any company and you could see where, whether it's an executive or an employee, there's an affinity to work for the same company. And there are ways you can navigate and mitigate the risk around the conflict of interest that exists. And would suggest that you do that, whatever the law is. Like you said, India would be more acceptable, but you should still put a standard where there is some purpose, some review, and take the person that's got the conflict out of the decision-making process, so that they can still have an opportunity for a child to join the company, but it's not the executive making the choice. Gretchen.
It also seems to me that you ought to make sure that whoever is interested in the job goes through the regular process, whatever it is. So you have job postings, well, throw your resume in with the rest of them, and then we'll see if you float to the surface. But to accept somebody in a high position's evaluation of their own child strikes me as, my kid's great and your division ought to hire him.
By the way, I'll do the same for you.
I hope he gets the chance to work here someday, and he's going to go through the hiring process like anybody else. I think that's better for the kid too in the long run, because it's very difficult to be the chosen one and to have people point at you all the time to say you got your job because of relationships as opposed to your competence.
I can share with you a story of a good friend of mine. He is also a tenure track at the university in Israel, and his father was the president of the university. And he was accepted to the university as a faculty, but everybody knew that he's the son of the president, and no one ignored the fact, and therefore all the promotion of this guy was harder than all of us, because everybody said, I don't want to be the one who signed on this
puts you in a difficult position.
And he told me that whatever you have to do, I have to do it twice and 3 times, because nobody really, most of the people were afraid to be part of this nepotism. So sometimes it's a good advice for the CEO or for his son. Listen, if you are still talented, go to another place.
Great point.
Call in a favor from a friend in another company.
Yeah, into another field.
Excellent. There's a lot that you could take, but there's the conflict of interest should be taken out. And where there's a fear of other people to take the choice, you can set up or establish a a group that's more than one person for executives. And in fact, I worked for a company many years ago where exactly that happened, because this complaint was made by several sources that this had happened and it was nepotism. And I recall vividly going into one division CEO's office, and he knew why I was there, and he got up from his desk and he put his hand out like, go ahead and slap my hand, but I hired the child. And again, there can be an argument that when you have people that are very talented, it might run in the family. So if you work for a big multinational company, you might want to have people that have an affinity, but you need to follow a process, or you need to have some step where you take the executives out of making these decisions. It's just not good for the culture and for people to see this. Yeah.
Well, and as we're talking, like, what is the difference between, what is the difference between effective networking and nepotism, right?
Mhm.
In terms of, we see, huge disproportion, we see some real injustice in the country, just in terms of where people go to school and how that translates into the networks that they build and the employment going forward. And I'm just, it's another form. It may not be, technically nepotism because they're not related, but it is exclusionary to people who don't have those connections.
Great point. Okay, thank you, everyone. Antitrust has many tentacles. So you have an employee that's offered a board position on a nonprofit innovation consortium. The opportunity could allow the company to insert influence and learn from other companies and universities. Several executives from direct competitors already sit on the board. Can the employee accept the offer to become a board member? Response is no. The employee sitting on a board with executives from competitor companies would expose the company to a high level of antitrust risk. Yes, the employee can accept the opportunity, and the company should properly prepare the employee to understand antitrust law, competition law, and to recognize and avoid potential conflicts. See, it depends. Okay, it looks like a large cluster around the employee can accept, but they should go through the process of being properly trained on how to handle this. A good percentage say it depends, and one says no, the employee cannot sit on the board. Thoughts? Just open it up, anyone.
Well, I think this depends on the company policy. So, as a lawyer, I'm going to say it depends almost all the time, right?
It depends is a great lawyer answer. But I think it does depend on what this Innovation Council does. I think it depends what the role of these folks are. I think you have to train not just your employee, but everyone on this consortium about antitrust risk, and to be able to identify when it occurs. I'm in a group right now that has a whole list of very specific rules. There are 300 people in this group, and they discuss matters ranging from what your COVID policy ought to be to, it turns out someone wanted to talk about compensation for executives. Well, that you can't do. And so immediately, this email was in my box for about a second when the group facilitator writes back, delete that message, we cannot discuss these topics, see our rules, and they have a whole big response to it. So somebody's got to be monitoring to make sure that this doesn't happen. If you worry that that's too much of a risk or your person can't handle it, you should just say no. Or if the innovation stuff that they're discussing, relates so closely to your business that you just don't want those conversations to occur, the safest thing is to say no.
Great points.
Also, it depends on what administration is in Washington and appointing the people for the Justice Department and what theory they use. I mean, because the whole notion of what is antitrust, it varies. I mean, and not because certain people have ill will or not. It seems to me that whole policy is still under evolution, and the old standard of we'll judge it according to how customers are affected is now under real question. And I'm trying to remember what the new standard is that some people are arguing for. There is an input, so you could also want to look at that.
there's a lot you need to consider, pay attention to, and it's not just once, it's over time to keep up with what are the rules. Other thoughts? Well, these are great responses, and to the point about you don't just look at the employee and whether they're capable. That's very important to handle that type of a situation when they're with executives of another company, because that could trigger some terrible antitrust violations that you do not want to go near. But to your point, also, it's the organization. Is that organization understanding what the laws are and going through the procedures that you have? So you'd use both determinations. And with the government, it's also interesting that many consortiums are sponsored by the government and they want competitors to come together. So you have to navigate this too, and that there's a value for the government, but everyone needs to follow those rules. And it's great to hear where you see an example where somebody from the organization speaks up and flags. Where we train employees is if you're involved in this type of a board and something comes up that's inappropriate to speak about with competitors, you don't just walk out, you loudly walk out. And this is a requirement by law, is you make a case that I can't be here, you're discussing areas that would be antitrust issue, and then you don't just walk out loudly, you contact your legal organization very quickly so that they can take the appropriate steps. But there's incredible value in some of these nonprofit boards and what the work they're doing is innovation consortiums. So it's a tough one. So this is going to be a little simpler one, and this is just a, well, this is a poll from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, or ECI. It's another member organization in Washington, D.C., and they run surveys, perception surveys with employees. They do this at a U.S. level, and they also do every so many years at an international level. So it's incredible how powerful the information is from these perception surveys that they run. So this is one case where ECI asked a question of, it's related to a recent survey. The Ethics and Compliance Initiative reported that the most unethical practice employees perceived at work was a conflict of interest, abusive behavior in the workplace, lying to employees and external stakeholders, internet abuse during business hours. Yeah.
Were they given the choices, or was it just tell us what's going on?
All right, we've got 7. I think we're close here. A number of people are responding. So we've got 60% saying abusive behavior in the workplace, 20% internet abuse, and a tie at 10% conflict of interest, lying to employees and external stakeholders. What? So the result is, in this case, C, which I found fascinating. And I apologize, I don't have the statistics for how many answer to each question, but the answer to the survey question is the most perceived issue is lying to employees and external stakeholders. And this really comes back to then, what we do as ethics and compliance organizations in companies is to drive a culture where people feel safe in the workplace, and that wouldn't be where lying it would be something that they perceive. But other thoughts?
We're saying it sounds as though there's not a lot of trust. They have to keep them to get the trust.
And that's something the company needs to pay attention to and address. So the question was that from the group, we don't have the mic out right now, but it would be obviously that there's not a lot of trust in that organization, and that's exactly right, and something you should pay attention to and take action to build. So that concludes the 10 cases, and again, example of what you go through. Appreciate everyone on the Zoom call. And a quick question for everyone is, with the APPE Board of Directors, we're looking at whether this might be a model we use forward, whether in the future years we might promote more to bring ethics and compliance professionals to actually participate in this along with APPE members at the annual conference. Any thoughts of, would this be valuable?
Yeah,
or?
I think that most,
Yes.
especially because maybe a lot of us will do these kinds of cases in our classroom, is hearing what you do at your company. So to me, an interesting part of that would be bringing in other folks like you to tell us how these specific issues are handled.
Mhm.
And, you know, we maybe know the textbook answers, Gretchen knows the legal answers, but it's good to hear what the compliance officers have to say about how specifically it's handled. So thanks, guys.
Sure, thank you. Anyone on the Zoom call?
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this. Very informative.
Thank you. So you would recommend going forward continuing this program through APPE?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the feedback.
And
Gretchen?
I think it would be great to have some number, but not too big a number, of ethics and compliance officers. So maybe 3. So you would get different industries maybe represented to get a different feel for it. Global companies, maybe just US-based companies. You might see some, I'm not saying that you will, but I think even if you just use these 10, you would get different answers depending on industry, global, local, whatever.
The goal wouldn't be to have 200 companies or participants. It would be to have a few to have that kind of diversity of thought. And probably a few less cases too, because I would, we'd spend more time on each case. Yes.
Well, I think, you know, the educator in me would love to see that you maximize kind of student exposure to something like this. You create an opportunity, you know, for students to sit in and see real world application of, you know, ethics, right? I think this would be invaluable. So I think it's great for us, but I can see
maybe there's other avenues then to explore in a limited basis. Great, that's good feedback. We'll consider that. I know for some of you, it's been a long day if you're in one of the pre-conference workshops and now the plenary and this session, and I think there's some food, light snacks waiting for us in the reception. I appreciate very much people coming in and spending the time and the active engagement in the conversation. And thanks for all of you joining virtually in this session.